Христос воскресе із мертвих, смертю смерть поправ, Ісусом во гробе живот даровав. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and the bones in the tombs he's going life.
Christ is risen.
Bless you. Christ is risen.
True is risen.
Okay, so this will be number 2 on confession, which we started just before Pascha. And there's one of the things that inevitably comes with discussion of confessions is lists of sins. And so I think it's really important to talk about what is sin. And people have all sorts of ideas, and and some of the confessions they dwell on, oh, I didn't finish my prayer rule, and I cut this prayer short, and I had a little bit of this, and I put milk in my coffee on Friday, and on and on and on. It's a recitation of kind of ritual transgressions of rules of piety. Then there's other confession. Yeah.
Do you need to?
That would be good. That would be good. Then there's another set of kind of typical confessions. Oh, my daughter. Oh, my daughter. Oh, I'm so worried about my daughter. Oh, she does this and she does that, and she's got this problem and she's got that problem, and it's like on and on. This great litany about her daughter, her son.
Confessing their sins, or just their worry for them?
No, not even. It's not even about sin. It's about just problems.
What they're doing with problems.
So that's one, or that's another one. Then there's another kind of typical confession. Says, well, I'm really, I'm really a good person. I really try hard, and I come to church as often as I can. I really try to be good, Okay, so what am I supposed to absolve? Then there's another one. Я грешный словом, делом и помышлением. I'm sinful, word, deed, and thought.
That's it.
That's it. It's like, okay, so what am I supposed to absolve? What did you do? And then some of them, it's like, okay, here, you must be a saint. I'll give you the epitrachilion, and you can give me absolution. So those are ways to not go to confession. And it's really important to understand that some of these transgressions of the rules of piety are, yes, it's missing the mark, which is what the word sin, amartia, in Greek means. It's like shooting an arrow and missing the mark, or shooting at a target with some implement and missing the mark. Maybe a pistol, I don't know. But it's not on the level of sin, unless it's a matter of attitude. So for example, I put a little milk in my coffee on Friday. Okay, so do better next time. Or I don't have to listen to those stupid rules. I'm going to do it because I feel like it. That's a sin.
But isn't that generally why we put milk in our coffee on Friday?
No.
Sometimes it could be by accident.
Sometimes it's just you're not thinking. It's like, oh, it's Friday. And
One time I drank water before Holy Communion. It was a Sunday, and it was an automatic thing. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Sunday. I can't take Holy Communion.
And then you,
But I told the priest, and he said, "You're fine. It's okay." You know, but it was a natural thing. It wasn't a, "Oh my God, I'm just going to drink this because."
Right.
You just have natural things to do, and that's.
yeah. That's another thing. You know, it's one thing if, especially if you have medicine or something that you need to take before communion. It's fine. You have a blessing to do that. That's not an issue. It's another thing if you just like to go out and have breakfast before going to church, and you're gonna do it regardless of what the church says, and there's no reason why other than that you like to do that.
So, Dika, when thinking about the wrong way to go into confession, and I know for myself, sometimes it's very intimidating, it's very hard to get out what you want, or you might know what the sin is, and some priests will just say, when you approach, "Oh, what's going on?" And even though you're confessing wrong, my daughter's doing this, or my daughter, there is an underlying sin in all that, correct? Like anxiety, worry, not giving it up to God. But we don't always recognize it.
Right, and that's why I will tend to just be patient and let the people talk and they're going to say what they're going to say.
And
it's between them and God.
Sometimes we get answers like, "Don't worry," and then you realize what the sin is.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, because one of the most important things that we need to do is we need to examine ourselves. And look and see how, you know, what is the real sin, and what is the real, you know, what's the real issue? Is it that my daughter's gone off and is living with her boyfriend and they're having a child and they're not going to, well, that's not your problem, that's her problem. And she's not the one coming to confession. However, you know, let's analyze it. What's the problem? A, judgment. B, even though yes, it's a correct discernment that yes, there is a sin involved, but she's obviously judging her as
jealous.
Maybe jealousy. Yeah.
But there's also concern in situations like because I know I'm guilty with my daughter, but it's not so much. Maybe I guess there is judging, but there's like this great concern for her soul. And seeing, you say, so discerning, you discern things. How can you? I mean, it's very hard not to judge. You discern, and then you become concerned. But in there somehow you're still judging. And how is that?
Well,
because
part of the problem with it is that it's correct judgment. It's obviously there is a sin going on.
Right.
The question is, how do you deal with it? And because if you're judging, then she's feeling judged, undoubtedly. So then that's creating more tension in the relationship.
Of course.
And so, and it's just this vicious circle of stuff that that builds and builds and builds and builds, and it becomes very it can spoil relationships.
Right. So it's like anything else. You have to learn to ignore it. It's, I've been told, "Oh, I've seen this," just ignore it. Just keep going, ignore it. So you ignore it? Even as a mother? You ignore the sin? As a parent?
And that's
it's a difficult line.
And that's the difficult line, because as a parent of an adult who's 30-something, probably, how much involvement, Well, I mean, it's one thing if the kid is 20 years old. It's another if she's 35.
This is true.
or 45 or 55.
55.
You know, so and you know, all of this figures in. In other words, it's not black and white.
Yeah. It's just hard.
And that's one of the one of the big things, you know, is that we get wrapped up in black and white thinking, and it's that doesn't. Am I saying that the daughter's sin is not black and white? Yes, it's a sin. There's no question about that. That's simply a fact. It's not a matter of judgment. It's not a condemning her. It's just like, okay, this is not how it's supposed to be.
Right.
But then the question is, how are you dealing with it? What is your interior process with it, and how is that affecting the relationship, and the relationship with her friend, and the relationship with, you know, and all around.
So the Holy Fathers tell us if we see someone fall or sin, a brother, to cover the sin.
Yes.
So we should do the same with our family, or those that aren't Orthodox, that whatever.
Well, yeah.
But that's very difficult with that when that motion is there. I guess that's the same husband and wife maybe too.
Yeah.
When that link, that connection is there.
Yeah. And then you come up with, you know, then there are some other, you know, more serious issues, and what do you cover and what do you not cover, and what do you. Yeah. So. And so there's all these variations, you know, and a lot of it has to do precisely with and what is the general principle underlying it. And so, for example, say your daughter's living with somebody and you're upset about it. Do you obsess about it to the point where it breaks your relationship with God, that all you're doing is thinking about this issue?
And that's a sin.
And that's a sin. Because ultimately, what is sin? It's anything that turns us away from God and towards ourselves.
So we get into cooking a dinner. It's like a fabulous dinner. We forget about God, we're sinning.
Actually, that would be. That could be.
I say that because I remember when I first started in the Serbian church. I guess some of it was made of the folklore or the, you know, oh, even if you just washing dishes and you could be sinning, you're sinning because your mind is on the dishes and not on God.
Doesn't sound right.
But you see, and this is where over scrupulosity comes in too. And so if somebody's really OCD, it'll drive them nuts. You know, all this kind of stuff.
But actually, you can pray while you're washing dishes.
You can pray while you're washing dishes. Of course, there's the whole Jesuit thing. You know, the Jesuit comes to the superior and says, "Father, can I smoke while I'm praying?" He says, "Of course not." He says, "Well, can I pray when I'm smoking?"
I know that one.
So the Orthodox aren't immune from such things either.
No.
But when it really comes down to it, you know, there are sins that are listed in the scriptures. There are sins that are listed in the you know, and they all have, you know, background to them, and, you know, as to what they are. But you know, but the core of it is anything that breaks our relationship with God. And it's not that God turns against us. It's that we turn away from Him. You know, there's including material in the Fathers about making God angry or offending God. No. The God who created the universe is everywhere present and filleth all things. How do you offend?
Oh, he's so forgiving, and he's so
Yeah,
faithful.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that you do it. So that doesn't mean you go do it purposely, but
Hmm.
we do.
Right.
I mean, but he's so forgiving.
Hmm. And how do you make God mad?
We don't make anybody mad. It's
Right.
their own personal choice to get mad, even his.
Right. So I mean, so there are these. You know, there's a whole religion of Calvinism built around the wrath of God.
Mm.
You know, it has a vague relationship to Christianity.
Catholics are good at that.
Calvin, yeah. But you know, when it comes down to it, this goes back to a whole anthropological question: is that how we were made and what constitutes our nature, and how because underlying the idea of or underlying the whole theology of the creation is this idea that God creates a nature, God creates human beings with a particular nature, which has kind of a divine idea, a logos, underlying it, which has a dynamic to it, has an energy to it. In other words, God conceives a duck. It looks like a duck and it acts like a duck. And how do you know it's a duck? Because it acts like a duck. It doesn't act like a chicken. It doesn't act like a sparrow. It doesn't act like a horse. It acts like a duck. So you know it by its energy, and you know it by its hypostasis, by its individual person, its individual subsistence. Okay, but underlying those is this kind of essence of duckness, as it were, which doesn't actually exist except as ducks. Okay, and it only is expressed by a duck, with a duck acting. And so when you have a dead duck, you just have a dead duck. You don't have an active being.
Anymore, that's
Okay.
gone.
In other words, you've got this these three aspects of being. There's the essence, there's the hypostasis, or the subsistence, or person, or subject, and the energy, or which is also includes the will. So, God creates a being which has a certain kind of essence, which it expresses, as a subject of a will. In other words, it's the one that does something. The duck does duck things. You know, the duck swims, the duck quacks, the duck eats bugs, you know, the duck, you know. Well, and it's the same thing with human beings. You know, there's a human nature, which is a kind of it's not really an abstraction, but it's a kind of a collective abstraction, if you were, of what human beings are. And human will, the natural will, in other words, the will that expresses the nature, the natural will, is what it means to act like a human. So you have the human person, the human subject, who is the active subject of the human being walks, the human being talks, the human being does this, the person does that. Now that's, but that's still in the kind of collective abstract, as it were. But underneath that, or implied by that, is a kind of a law of human nature, or a natural law as to how a human being is supposed to act. of how a human being is supposed to exist. So, for example, one of them is that God made human beings male and female. He made most living creatures male and female, and it is the natural order. It's the natural will. It's the expression of God's will for the human being for the male and the female to come together and to be joined together. And not for the male and the male to come together and be joined together, and not for the female and female to be joined together. There's friendship and there's love, but it's contrary to the natural order to have them mated.
Right.
Unless you're in Australia, then you have your mates. But that's a different story. So you have this this natural law of human nature, which is kind of the foundation of understanding what is, how if a human being is living according to nature.
So this natural law that you're talking about, I'm trying to figure out the name of the book, isn't it Proverbs?
And it may be in Proverbs, but this natural law was developed both in the Byzantine East and the Greek East and the Latin West.
Okay.
It took different tracks. But
the core of it stems really from the Bible.
The core of it is from the scriptures, yeah. And it's based in theology, and it's based in, the understanding that God made human beings, made male and female persons, and there is a natural order as to how human beings live.
But doesn't our society affect what we perceive to be natural law?
No.
Because what was natural for them in Constantinople, where the majority of the population was slaves, would be abhorrent in America today.
Not on the level of natural law. Natural law would be something that applies to all people, regardless of any kind of human status, human social status. And the fundamental point of the natural order from the Greek perspective, the Orthodox patristic perspective, is that the human being was created primarily to be in living, conscious communion with God.
With God. And so when you break that natural order, when you allow the will to override that natural order, then we break communion with God.
Right. And it's not that God turns away from us, it's that we are turning away from God.
So what you're saying is we need to kill our will?
No.
Not kill the will, but change the will.
It means to bring it back in accordance with the natural order.
Right, the sinful willfulness.
Yeah, and the theology of St. Maximus the Confessor talks about a duality of will in human beings. There's the natural will, which we just talked about, and then there's the gnomic will.
What?
Gnomic will, G-N-O-M-E.
Okay.
Like the little guy in the garden, right? The gnomic will means individual, kind of like individual opinion, and it's the fallen will of the individual person, of the individual hypostasis, which may or may not be in accordance with the natural will. And to the extent that we're fallen, it's out of sync with the natural will. It's out of synergy with the natural will. And so the task is to bring our particular individual will into synergy with the divine will.
And that's healing.
And that's healing, and that's also the process of theosis. That is what that's what fulfills our humanity. Now, in our fallen and broken world, what's happened is that the individual will of each person has become is what governs each person in their actions, and the natural will is suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Suppressed, and so when we're in a really gravely sinning, we're acting against nature.
Mm-hmm.
Against nature. And so here again the task is to bring it back it's the restoration of our humanity to eliminate sin, which means to come into communion with God.
It's because the way I see it is there's a lot of selfishness because we're chasing, people want to be known, so they do their own thing, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's just awful.
Well, and selfishness is the core of it, because if what is out of kilter is the individual will of each person, it's all about that person.
Yeah.
It's all about that individual subsistence, that autonomous individual who is under the delusion that they're autonomous and can act autonomously.
Right.
Because obviously we're not autonomous. You know, we don't exist autonomously. We have parents, we have grandparents. They had grandparents, and back generations and generations, and ultimately we have this this chain of dependent existence,
Mm-hmm.
going back, to Adam
Right.
and Eve, whatever that means. So one of the aspects of sin is this illusion of autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a self-centered, selfish kind of motivation, and it's according to if you listen to Saint Maximus, it's the principle of pleasure and pain, and that's avoiding pain and seeking pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But Saint Maximus's principle is that if there is pleasure, there is going to be pain, and it's inevitable. And it's a kind of an odd dynamic. But his, and this is the teaching of Maximus, not the teaching of the Orthodox Church. Saint Maximus is a great theologian, but his theology is not the universal teaching of the Church. So that would be one of the ways that he would explain the passing down of mortality through natural conception. If you're conceived in pleasure, therefore you're going to experience the pain of death.
What if it wasn't pleasurable?
That's not the...
It's the act, it's that selfishness of wanting to participate. That selfish-centered will.
How would he explain in vitro if it had existed back then?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I'm sure he would not say it's an immaculate conception.
But it's outside the natural order of conception.
It's totally outside the natural order. So, so if you look in, for example, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 16. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. And these are opposed to each other, to prevent you from doing what you would. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are plain: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, selfishness, dissension, party spirit, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and the like. I'll finish it off. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. So, obviously, there's a strong ascetic theology underlying, and philosophy underlying the understanding of how of Christian moral principles. It's about self-denial. It's about cutting off the desires of the flesh to act in accordance with the Spirit. When we're looking at sin, we have to look at not only at in terms of actions, but also in terms of thoughts and intentions. You know, Jesus was very specific when, you know, he said, if you look at a woman to commit adultery with her, then you've already sinned in your heart. Of course, Jimmy Carter made that famous. You all remember. So we need to be watchful over ourselves in terms of all of these various aspects of our life, so that what we're striving to do is to live according to the Spirit. In other words, this fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and so forth, and not live according to the flesh. In other words, according to selfishness. Selfishness is the core of all sin, and it's the core of all sin because it keeps us centered not on in our true self, but in this false self of the gnomic will that we have created. This kind of individual autonomous delusion of ourself, which is what St. Paul calls the old man, and that is not in accordance with the will of God, but, as he says, is corrupt through the lust of the flesh. And when he says corrupt through the lust of the flesh, he's not only talking about carnal lust. He's talking about all of these things which are idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, selfishness, dissension. All of that stuff is corrupt according to the lust of the flesh, as well as the sexual stuff. Is this making sense?
I'm trying to.
Okay. In other words, if it's selfish, it's a sin. If our motivations are selfish, it can even take what's good and make it a sin.
So where does pride come in?
What is pride? It's complete. It's complete focus on the self.
So, which comes first, pride or selfishness?
Pride or selfishness?
Which is the...
They're ultimately the same thing.
It's the same, okay.
But you look at, like, the 7 deadly sins or the 8 passions: gluttony, lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, despondency, vainglory, and pride. It's all about selfishness. So when we're examining ourselves to go to confession, we need to look and see what are the things that are feeding our selfishness. What are the acts? What are the thoughts? What are the intentions that are the thoughts and intentions that motivate our actions, and recognize that these are sins in order to be able to externalize them. In other words, usually write them down is a good way of doing that, and confess them. That's another way of externalizing it. And in confessing it, bring it to confession, then you expose it so that the grace of God can heal that, can heal the wound left by those actions.
It's that point of expressing it, because once you express it, you're recognizing it. Yeah.
But you also gain control over it.
Take some of its power away.
You take its power away.
Right.
And that's one of the really big traps. Is that we're too often have all of this false, it's actually vainglory and false false shame that, what will he think of me if I confess this, and he's going to judge me and all of that. It's not, which is all false. It's all just fear, and so we hide things in confession, and all we're doing is feeding it and giving it more and more and more energy, and more power, instead of getting rid of it and letting the energy, the grace of the Holy Spirit come in and heal the wound. Because ultimately, all of these things leave wounds.
What about someone who's an alcoholic and they drink and they can't help themselves? They try and they can't help themselves. So they go to confession every week and they say, well, I got drunk every day this week. Next week they go and they say, I got drunk every day this week. And this goes on for years and years and years. Isn't there some point where their confessor is going to get upset with them?
Actually, their confessor should give them a penance to say, and you have to go to AA, and you have to sober up. And if you want communion, you're going to have to sober up.
But is there a point that they do that at that's like short, or is it a long way down the road? Or is it per person?
It's each person, but it depends if the confessor knows the person and understands what's really going on. Because sometimes a person, instead of saying, "Oh, I got drunk every day this week," will say, "Well, I had a little bit to drink."
Well, eventually, because
they're in denial.
Yeah, because they're in denial, and or if you're talking about alcoholics, and there's a saying in AA that how do you know an alcoholic is lying? His lips are moving. His lips are moving. They're going to lie, and they'll deny that they have that they drink. You can smell it on them. You can smell the formaldehyde coming out of their pores. You can smell the alcohol in their breath, and they say, "No, I don't drink." And so, if you have a confessor who really cares about his people, he's going to try and do something with this person. But the person has to want to, you know, has to want to correct their life.
But isn't that the same way with us in sin? We have to want to heal. We have to want to come to Christ and come into that coexistence with Him. Because otherwise we won't confess. Correct?
Right. You know, and sometimes it, you know, and it's hard, especially dealing with alcoholics in particular, for example. You know, it's, and they're usually in great total denial that they have a problem.
But that probably true for most people with addictions.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you get them to understand it? Well, if in AA, you know, the wisdom is that they have to bottom out first, and that's pretty brutal. You know, a lot of people that means ending up in the gutter
because they think they can control it.
Yeah.
But you see how similar it is to, like, you know, Christ, like us, we pretty much bottom out. We get to the point, those of us that weren't raised in a church, where we cry to God, and then that's when God steps in. Like we cry to Christ, you know, please help me, or we're in despair, we cry out, you know. So it's kind of like the same bottoming out, but only maybe without alcohol.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's that moment when you cry out that you want the right thing, which is God.
Right. Well, most of us are addicted to sin.
Right. Right.
We have our favorite passions.
We have our favorite passions, and you know, and it's interesting, you know, if you look at the literature and you know, both the patristic literature as well as the psychological literature, is what is addiction about? Addiction is about covering up pain. It's a way of distracting yourself from the pain of you know, whatever, you know. It can be of having been abused, of having been, you know, having self-hatred, of having low self-image, of having been, you know, a failed relationship, or whatever, you know, of PTSD and all of that can create a whole kind of addictive personality in which a person is looking to anesthetize the pain. The way to heal the pain is not through anesthetizing it. The way to heal the pain is ultimately in confession and through confession. But you have to have a confessor who's really willing to work with the person as they go through, and the person has to be really willing to work through their own issues. If they're not, then it's not going to work. So,
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Everyday life. Comes the evening, you sit in front of the television, turn it on, the news. So many people killed in such and such a country. So many people killed in such a country. Such a country sold a lot of armaments to do the killing. And you're full of hate. What is happening? How is God allowing it? And immediately you're beginning to sin. How can you prevent this from happening? Isn't that natural?
Is it natural?
Well,
No, it's not natural. It's
If I was a cold fish, then nothing would bother me.
Well, but what should our reaction be?
I don't know, that's what my question.
Well, I think our reaction should be to mourn.
We usually ask the question, how can God allow such a thing to happen?
Yeah, and the thing is, God allows us to have our free will, and all of that is a product of our free will.
But we can't help it.
Yes, we can help it.
Only the killing itself?
We can't help that.
No.
That we can't help. But those are persons exercising their free will.
They're making a choice to kill.
Yeah. and there's nothing that we can do about that, unless we want to go and kill them, which is what our usual response is, and then we just multiply the cycle of violence. You know, we blame God for all sorts of things.
No, it's not really blaming, it's asking the question.
Asking the question is all right. It's when we blame God that's when the problem comes.
No, the question is how God can allow such things to happen. Especially when they show children, you know, that are dead. And these are horrible pictures that are shown to us.
Yeah.
I mean, not to react, you have to go, I don't know, of some special consistency.
Yeah. Yeah, but the question is, you know, what's the appropriate reaction? I would say probably the appropriate reaction is mourning. Mourning.
As a human, but God has His ways too. But that's been going. The killing has been going on forever
since Cain and Abel.
That's the free will. Yes, that's free will. God gave free will, and the free will is
One
not
of the
always.
first commandments is "Thou shalt not kill."
But
that's right.
If you're not from this religion, you don't believe those commandments. So.
And even if you are,
You
there's a
still
lot of people who don't.
Yeah.
But that's one of the first commandments, and we know that God doesn't will that.
Yeah.
But why? But God allows our free will to reign, and He doesn't abridge it.
But if
He gave us free will, and we've messed things up, and we continue to mess things up.
So as unfortunate
I
it
understand
is.
when you say mourn. Of course we mourn. It's a pity. It's a great pity.
But look how
Stealing
God.
the life from somebody, you know, is not allowed. I hope it's a kind of all religions actually. So maybe the exception is the Muslim religion. But does this really help to prevent these things from happening? What can we do to stop this massacre?
Well, if we, if people would mourn instead of seek vengeance, then I think we'd be on the right track.
Would be.
The killing will stop.
Well, it would begin to stop, yeah. Because it's the cycle of vengeance that's really one of the greatest problems.
Who was it? James that said that Elijah was just a man, and he prayed and it didn't rain for 3 years, and then he prayed and it rained.
But it's not really vengeance, it's the war industry that is promoting all these wars.
But look what God did with it.
Then we have the
Doesn't make any sense
And
at
then
all.
we have the power of the vote, which we aren't obviously using.
Even
very
that
well.
one is regulated.
But if we look at the lives of saints, and I'm sure they were saying the same thing to these people, these innocent men and women that were killed by other people. I mean, and they became saints. So God turned that into good somehow. Somehow there's a. He turns it.
Somehow it's within God's providence that
Yeah.
He can use, that everything that happens can be used for good. That doesn't mean He wills it, but
Right.
that everything that happens can be used for good.
We just don't
As
understand.
far as the sinner,
Can't comprehend.
and every Sunday you should go and confess that you have spoken against God. So it's an endless task.
That's how the average confessional prayer begins. Is that you daily sin against God by rejecting His gifts and His promises and not trusting Him.
It's not rejection, it's questioning it. And is that a sin?
Questioning it is not a sin. It's kind of, I don't think it's very, ultimately very fruitful.
Well, I don't think anybody found any fruitful solution.
No, people have been asking that for millennia. So what is it that we confess? I think this is kind of bringing things back. We need to confess the things that are, specific transgressions which have separated us from God. Now, there's another level and there are multiple levels, and as people mature in the Christian life, the first level in the Christian life is, you got to clean up your act externally. If you're committing fornication, you got to stop. If you're committing adultery, you got to stop. If you're beating people up and fighting and all of that kind, you got to stop. If we're slandering and judging and condemning and taught and gossiping and all of that stuff, we got to stop. Okay, that's the external level. That's the first level. Second level is a little more subtle, and that's because after we've gotten ourselves under control, so that we're not committing these outward acts of sin, it's much more on the level of intention, thought, and intention. And so this is where, especially, it's valuable to confess kind of obsessive thoughts of various sins, of whatever it is, whether it's carnal, whether it's anger, whether it's judgment, whether it's envy, whatever it is. And so it's that's the next level. Then the level beyond that is where a person is matured to a point where they have come to that conscious awareness of the presence of God. So the saints, for example, Saint Seraphim of Sirov, somebody like that, who would absolutely, candidly, and with all the greatest honesty say, I am the worst of sinners. I sin more than anybody else. And here we look at him and say, how? It's right. Unthinkable. How? But it's precisely on the level of being distracted from the awareness of the presence of God. Because whether it's on this most subtle level of having gotten distracted from our awareness of God by a thought that comes in, or whether it's an obsessive thought and with an intention that isn't fulfilled, or whether it's an outward act, it's all about being distracted from God and becoming forgetful of God. And forgetfulness in patristic literature is not about where did I put my keys. Forgetfulness means forgetting that God is present. Mm-hmm. And so the core of the spiritual life is about building a constant, as St. Simeon the New Theologian puts it, a constant conscious awareness of the presence of God. Constant conscious awareness of the presence of God. That's what real spirituality is about.
I read one book, it was titled Practicing the Presence of God.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there's some nice, there's some good stuff, and there's some very pietistic stuff out there, and that, but it doesn't mean having a 3-bar cross stamped on everything, or putting an icon on every possible place you might look, and all of that.
Or even admitting to everybody
helps,
that you're the worst sinner.
It may or may not, actually.
Or even maybe, like I've seen, and people will come up, you'll be talking, oh, I'm the worst sinner, forgive me.
Yeah.
That's an outward.
Yeah,
It's like it's.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just disingenuous.
Yes.
In reality, it's just play spirituality.
Because when you feel that you are, if you feel that you don't, it doesn't come out that way. It's just kind of different.
Mm-hmm. But then you have the great saints who would say, everybody else is more worthy of the kingdom than I am.
But they wouldn't just.
And they would, and that would not be some kind of a pious, disingenuous statement as a manifestation of their own vainglory.
Exactly.
To attract attention.
Exactly. Exactly.
which is what it. Well, that's what it would be for me. Anyway,
yes.
It would be, but it would be a real sense.
But what keeps that from mixing with self-hatred? when you look at everybody else and you realize that everybody else is way better than you, how does it?
Jealousy.
No, not jealousy, but self-hatred, because you realize how low on the totem pole you truly are.
Well, because what that can lead to is despair, which is and self-hatred go together, and you can have that can lead you to an attitude either of despair, or it can lead you to an attitude of hope. That
Right.
I need to work harder. I need to keep going. I need the mercy of God. By the mercy of God, I'll be.
So it's a continual crossroads that you have to continually face of which path I'm going to take. If I
Right.
go.
And this is where the saying of Saint Silouan comes in: keep your mind in hell and do not despair.
It can drive you to want to get closer to God. See?
Right.
You want to change. You don't want to be like that. You want to get better. You want to heal. You want to.
And this is dealing with, the kind of the real depths of inner spiritual struggle.
Interesting enough, when Jesus was saying about how the final judgment will go through and how he will divide the people, he didn't mention any sins at all.
Right.
So,
Well, in that particular parable, he said the sheep and the goats. Well, what are the sheep and the goats?
yeah.
Yeah. So, but what were the criterion that he mentioned in Matthew 25?
He mentioned that if you, basically in total, if you help your neighbor, you will be saved. And if you don't, you won't be saved.
Yeah.
That's it.
Remember Tolstoy's story of the onion? The old lady and the onion? I think it's Tolstoy, isn't it? Yeah.
I think so.
There was a really nasty old lady, and she died, and she was, let's Americanize it. He was standing at the pearly gates, and the angels. Well, this actually feeds into the next part of this time, and the angel were saying, so, is there even one good deed that you did in your entire life? And she said, and she thought, and she said, yes, I gave my neighbor an onion. And the angel said, well, good, here's the onion. And then somebody from down below, from hell, reached up and grabbed the onion. And she, to be pulled out of hell by the onion. And she said, no, my onion, my onion. And down she goes.
I've heard that.
Yeah. I think that was Tolstoy.
I think so.
Yeah.
The other thing is,
Or Cathedral.
how about a soldier?
Mm-hmm.
He has to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
The priest comes and blesses him.
Right.
And he goes to war and
Mm-hmm.
he kills
Mm-hmm.
or gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
Is he guilty? Is he a sinner?
Has he sinned? Yes.
What is he going to do?
Well, and so he has to repent of the
He
killing.
has to repent, that's right. But before he repents, is he a sinner?
Yes, of course.
But he's
Everybody's a
ordered
sinner.
to. If you're in a draft and you're ordered, you have to go.
And
You're forced to sin.
you're forced to sin. But even if a soldier kills in war, he still receives the penance of somebody who's murdered, according to the books. So it's, sin is sin. I mean, to take a life is sin.
So then how come in old Russia, coming back to society, in War and Peace or whatever, when the soldiers went to war with Napoleon, the priest stands in front of them and he blesses them. So,
But what was he blessing them for? Was he blessing them to go kill?
I don't know.
Or was he blessing them that they might act honorably and that they might be safe? And that they might act in accordance with in a Christian way.
Well, usually they bless in order to have a victory, and usually they pray in order to have a victory.
To have a yeah.
But what
There's-
is that victory? It's a different perception
right?
than what
And
we have.
Well, on the
And is that-
battlefield,
but-
it's very clear what is a perception of victory.
what's the perception? But what is the church blessing?
Yeah,
And that's
it's
the question.
two different victories.
But killing in self-defense is not a sin, is it?
Is there a sin? Yes. If there's a sin.
You still
Were you defending
You're
yourself?
defending yourself, or
Well,
Shouldn't that
that's the
guy,
whole
so he
thing.
doesn't kill you?
any killing is sin.
So if I'm a soldier and I'm forced to go to war and I'm faced with a shotgun in me, instead of killing them, I let them kill me to avoid that sin.
How many martyrs have there ever been?
I mean, is that how it works?
And so you accept to sin in order to.
So the soldier that is blessed, he goes to war, he kills, and he gets killed. He didn't have time to go and confess. So he's like I said, he's gonna go to,
No greater love do you have than if you lay down your life for your friends.
say it again?
There's no greater love than one who lays down his life for his friends. When you go to war, you are protecting the people behind because you can't turn somebody else's cheek. It's only your own cheek you can turn. And so they're protecting somebody. If they die in battle, they die protecting their friends who are around them and the friends who couldn't defend themselves.
So in that
So that's great love.
I understand.
But if he killed before he died, is what
Yeah,
he
but he killed before he died, so he has to be, I mean,
Well, that's a matter of God's judgment, and the thing is, we can't usurp that judgment. In other
But he
words,
doesn't
we
have
can't
time
know
to
how
repent.
God is going to judge that. But what this is about, and what confession is about, is how would a soldier who's killed in battle deal with it personally, and deal with the fact that he has
That is a
taken
truth,
another
yeah.
person's life.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about. That's what confession would be about.
The that underlying what was going on in his mind and heart at that time. Yeah.
Right. And so,
His hers.
right. And so it's like, is there a sin? Yes. Is it? Are all sins on the same level? No.
Right.
Is it black and white? No. Take another example from the fathers. Twin girls, separated at birth. One was raised in a brothel, and the other was adopted by rich people. The other one was raised in a convent. And the one that was raised in a convent lived a life of immaculate purity, and the one who was raised in a brothel, well, didn't. What was normal to one would be utterly inconceivable to the other. So, for the one raised in the brothel to commit fornication would be normal. To the girl raised in the convent would be unthinkable. An outrageous sin. Now, does that mean that the prostitute is not sinning? No, I mean, she's sinning. But would it be on the same level as if the nun was sneaking out?
You'd be more grateful than none to commit one act than for the prostitute to live her life in debauchery.
Right. And the thing is, we can't usurp the judgment of God, and how God judges it that's His business and not our business. But what we need to deal with is, how do we deal with the effect of our own sin, given who we are and the context that we've grown up in, the context we live in, and how do we process it internally so that we can confess what we need to confess and do the appropriate kind of penance for what we need for the healing of our soul. A soldier who goes out and just makes mayhem and does all sorts of unthinkable acts and mutilations, and
that's different.
Well, but there are people who do that, who
Yeah,
go,
they do, they do it.
who go barbarian like
Yeah,
that. That would be one thing. It would be another thing for you know, a soldier to
defends
as you-
his country.
well, and defending his buddies who are, you know, surrounding, and that's which is the usual context for the soldier. It's not the country, it's not freedom, it's not the ideals, it's his buddies.
The guy next to you.
Yeah.
At that moment, yeah, but you're in fire.
And so how the one would process it versus the other. Now, if you had a berserker like that, I don't know how they would process it, because it's, you know, they would probably be locked up, and then that would be God's judgment. But they probably wouldn't be coming to confession. They might, but the other guy most likely would be coming to confession, and most likely he'd be torn up inside that he had taken another life.
Like St. Paul.
Right.
Saint.
So, we can't usurp the judgment of God. We have to look at sin and look at it in terms of each particular sin in relation to the particular person that we are regarding ourselves. Now, there's what's that time?
Just after 9.
So, can we go to 9:30? Is that okay? Can somebody get me some water, please? Oh, thank you. It helps to have, when we examine our conscience, it helps to have lists of sins. And there's all sorts of them. I think one of the things that's available in the church narthex is St. John of Kronstadt's examination of conscience, and that's good. But there's another one, and this is connected with a very controversial or somewhat controversial idea and doctrine called the toll houses. I'll wait for Dave to get back. Everybody's heard of the toll houses, right? Well, you've heard of them.
Yes, I've heard of them.
Yeah, you
That's
spoke
all
about
I
it.
just heard of them.
Okay.
You wouldn't tell me until tonight.
Yeah. Well, there's a new book about the toll houses. Thank you. The Doctrine of the Toll Houses from St. Anthony's Monastery. It's 1,100 pages long.
It's light reading.
Yeah, and it's a complete kind of resource book as to where you find the discussion of the toll houses in all the major sources, in the doctrine, in the services, in the lives of the saints, in the doctrine, and the scriptures even, and so forth. And what the doctrine of the toll houses is that after death the soul has a certain process, and part of that is it ascends to judgment, to God. And but on the way, it passes through trials, and there are certain, and in a very kind of graphic method of looking at it. This is illustrated as like toll houses along a path, and that the toll keepers are demons that accuse the soul, that accuse the person of sins. And if you've committed the sin, and if you've confessed it, you pass through. And if you've committed the sin and you haven't confessed it, but you've concealed it, you've got a problem. And if you haven't committed the sin, but they accuse you of it anyway, you can be, you can call them a liar and go your way, I guess. There's all sorts of doctrines. There's specifically the current kind of major version of it came out of the life, the text of the life of Saint Basil the New, who died in 944, and it relates the dream vision of a nun by the name of Theodora, who went through this process of ascent through the aerial toll houses. Now, originally this is undoubtedly a Gnostic pagan doctrine that was in popular religious mythology that people all knew and understood because it was in the popular culture, and was adapted by the fathers as a means of trying to teach people that they have to be accountable for their sins. Now, there's another way of looking at it, which is also, I think, somewhat equivalent, is that that we will be, if we're not already, challenged by our conscience regarding certain sins, in regards to regret for sins, in regards to guilt for sins, and especially those that we have not confessed, that we've not dealt with. So, if you want to personify those accusations to accusers, you can call it your conscience, you can call it the demons. There's all sorts of misconceptions about the toll houses, that this is how God judges us, and that's not the case. And there's all sorts of, and then there's other misconceptions that make this some kind of a concrete, an actual set of.
This is how it really happens.
This is how it really happens, and there's an actual place, and there's these little beasties with fangs and horns and a tail that are going to torment you on the way up to But all of those are images, all images. Now, what's important to understand is that the Church absolutely affirms that there are demons, and they do accuse us of our sins. And if we have things that are unconfessed, if we have things that need to be dealt with, our conscience will accuse us, but we might also be accused by the demons, as that is essentially their job, or part of their job, so what that should do is it should spur us on to be more careful in this life, so that we don't sin, and to more carefully prepare for confession, so that we don't leave anything unconfessed. Because if we confess everything, essentially, what is that in this life? It's the judgment before the judgment.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask, well, Vika, isn't this what we do on a daily, weekly, yearly basis? Our life goes along, something happens, and we say, "Oh, this was a test from God." But maybe not what it's a test. It's a practice to get through. We need patience to learn patience, or to learn whatever it is.
Yeah, it is.
So it's kind of like you get stopped because you messed up. You gotta go. Yeah.
And if we're really mindful, we can see the things that are hanging us up from making progress.
Yeah.
So there's an aspect of it, whereas it's on one hand it's a kind of typology of this ascent to the heavens, or the ascent of the soul to God. On the other hand, it's also a kind of a typology of the spiritual life.
Or a practice for when you do get there and they do in your hierarchies and how
Right.
your soul reacts, what it's used to doing.
Right. Now, one of the things that's been used over the years as a guide to confession are the names of the toll houses, are the names of the. In other words, what are the sins that the demons accuse us of from the life of Saint Theodora? And there are 21 of them. Slander, verbal abuse, envy, falsehood, wrath and anger, pride, idle chatter, usury and deceit, ennui and vainglory, avarice, drunkenness, maliciousness, magic and divination, gluttony, idolatry and heresy, homosexuality and pederasty, adultery, murder, theft, fornication, and heartlessness and cruelty. That's the list from Saint Theodora's life.
Excuse me, are demons related to devil?
Yeah,
So why should they judge me?
they don't.
But I have to pass through the gates?
Well, what they accuse,
Yes.
and
How do they expect a saint to do that?
no, actually,
An angel to do that?
well, no, the angels are there defending us, and that's the other side.
Your defense attorney's your angel.
Is your guardian angel?
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Was it St. John of Shanghai who said that when you're baptized, you of course receive your guardian angel, but at the same moment you receive a demon who records your every thoughts and your every deeds?
I don't know. All of that is. That's not to be taken
Literally, but as a cautionary measure for your life.
Right, in the sense. Yeah.
But they have the right to send you to hell, no?
No,
If you're hiding something.
no, actually not. But they accuse you, and God is the only judge.
Okay, so if you tell them a lie, what happens? You move to the next
I don't think you can lie.
They know your heart just like
Yeah, they know
They
you.
can
It's
do
not like
anything.
you have to make an answer.
Are they the ones who have tempted you to do these very things that now they're accusing you of?
Maybe.
Very good point.
Do you remember that
I like
time in 1954 when
And that's the next question. Radhika, do we ever confess all of our sins? Do we ever? No, because we're human.
Well, I think we need to try.
Well, yes, of course we need to try, but we never get to that point where we confess all of our sins.
I have a follow-up question on this. If you want to go for confession and you feel you haven't committed any sin, what do you do?
Then you go to the priest, and the priest gives you the epitracheline and says, "Here, please forgive me."
But that doesn't mean that you did not sin and you couldn't remember.
But it means, and sometimes we're just not mindful of our sins.
The whole idea there is to clean the sins and have the communion,
Right.
so that you are released from stress and
Well-
guilt and all kinds of things.
Well, yeah. The thing is, we're called to examine our conscience before communion, and sometimes our conscience accuses us, and sometimes it acquits us. And so, if you don't feel like you've committed anything, or that nothing comes to mind, then reality, you don't need to go to confession.
You can go to communion. I'm sorry. You can go to communion without confession.
Yeah, I mean, if
Sorry.
as long as you go on a regular basis, yeah.
Hello. It's just no rocking.
So.
Nada. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
No problem. So, as you know, as long as we're going to confession on a regular basis, then.
But isn't the priest supposed to pry in and try to extract something from you by asking you questions? That's what happened to me in Mount Athos.
Well, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't.
He kept me on my knees for about an hour.
Really?
While he was sitting comfortably in the chair.
Uh-huh.
And I complained to him that I was in pain.
The father interrogation.
Yes, he
Yeah, I
said,
don't do
it's
that.
okay, it's okay, it's okay. I didn't think it was okay. Especially when I was confessing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, that's more,
But that helps
yeah,
if the confessor asks questions.
it does. And sometimes the confessor is more inclined to ask questions than not.
So can you ask the confessor, please ask me questions?
Oh yeah,
You
absolutely.
can do that.
And some people don't like it when they get asked questions.
Well, one natural response is like, you know, if you don't really feel like you've sinned, but maybe you couldn't pinpoint it, you could ask the Father to say, well, go, please guide me. I'm not quite sure.
Exactly.
You know, even if it's not a real burning thing, you know, I don't think we have to be on fire when we're going to confession, but you have to have at least some sort of movement. You went up there for some reason, right?
Right.
But a lot of times we haven't worked out what it exactly it is, or maybe it's just far too complicated for us to understand, and we need somebody experienced to help us deal with it.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's, and that you can certainly do. But then there's also, you know, especially around here, a lot of Rococo churches, people will just go automatically every week, whether they have something to confess or not, or every time they, even before every liturgy, sometimes, in some churches. And they don't have anything to confess.
That can bring you into a different attitude, I'm not sure. You have to feel like you have to confess, because if you just do it routinely every week, just because for the sake of having, then you're not really looking into your heart, I would think.
Right.
Right?
Right, and there's a bunch, I think there's several different kinds of pitfalls. You know, one is to do it just routinely,
Yeah.
And whether you have any sense of repentance or not,
Right.
and then that's no good. Another is to become so over scrupulous. Bishop Pancrati in Milan tells a story of he went to when he was a young priest monk at the Trinity St. Sergius Labre, and it was a feast day, and he was hearing confessions, and there were 10 priests lined up in this church hearing confessions. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning. The vigil had long since ended, and there were still lines and lines of people. And to his horror, there was a woman in line next his line who brought a stack of her sins for that week. A stack of papers, and so he was leaning on the analogian, and to his horror he fell asleep as she was droning on, and what was even worse, to his horror, when he woke up, she was only half done.
Couldn't he just take the papers and look through them real quick and go, do you have anything else you want to confess? Okay. And be done in a matter of a minute?
A lot of the instances, it's not necessarily confessing to the priest; it's confessing to God, and you're having the priest guide you along with it.
Right.
I think that's a general misconception, and I think forgive me, Father. Isn't it the Catholics that kind of confess directly towards the priest, and it's the priest acting as the
well, the priest is the witness.
Yeah, the priest is a witness. But
Our theology and the Catholic theology is pretty much the same.
yeah,
Because they don't say forgive me, they say bless me, Father.
yeah.
Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, and I've read where maybe you should, if you feel like you have those sins to confess, you still should go to confession, because then that's, your mind is away from God, and that is a sin, right? You're not mindful of anything. You're not
Well, then you can confess forgetfulness and distraction and
Right.
that kind of thing.
Okay, so yeah, it doesn't always come to you that way, but.
Right.
In some sense, you have to struggle with it. You have to struggle. You know,
You have to struggle
you
with
you have to struggle with it. You have to formulate what it is you're trying to do, so that way you have something to work with. But yeah, it's just part of the routine feeling. You know, you can't make it a routine, but you should do it routinely.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to. I don't want to interchange those words together because that could be meant the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
During the Holy Week, we all confess, and then the priest says, if you don't commit serious sins, you're entitled for communion next Sunday.
That's the question I have.
Now, what is serious sin?
Well, actually, no, this is a really important question. And,
But you're allowed to judge yourself,
well,
because the
yeah,
priest says if you sin.
yes.
So you're there
And part of it is,
sitting in your own judgment.
and part of it, you have to judge. You have to judge according as to whether your sins are, what they are. Are these? In other words, are they mortal sins? Are they sins that lead to death, or are they kind of venial
Well, you
nonsense?
had an argument with your wife. Is that a mortal sin?
It depends.
It depends. It can be.
Well, she didn't die.
No. but if you killed her, or if the argument leads to divorce, or if you ran
my
off with some
question
girl as a
is,
result,
You're really your own judge,
Uh-huh.
and maybe that shouldn't be the way. You should still go for another confession.
Well, the thing is, we need to be. You see, there comes a point in the spiritual life when you have to judge whether something has taken you away from God and even obsessively taken you away from God,
Or
from awareness of God, or whether it's just something in passing, or whether it was a serious action. Now, what would mortal sin? Obviously murder, adultery, fornication.
7 sins, okay.
Yeah.
How about fasting?
No.
It's not.
No, it's not a mortal sin.
It's a ritual.
Yeah, ritual transgressions are not sins.
You're beyond the age
So
of fasting.
the priest, when I go to confession, asks me the question, "Were you fasting?"
Mm-hmm.
And I say, "No, Father."
Mm-hmm.
Or I say, "Yes, Father." And then he says, "Well, what did you eat?" "I ate fish." He says, "It's not fasting." And then I tell him, "Father, then tell me, please." He says, "Look at the line there. I cannot spend more time with you."
Well, that's not.
I found it very confusing, but then
Well, you would.
relieved me of my sins. That was the important part.
Mhm.
So I could go for communion.
Yeah, and that's why one of the things that's really important, and in fact, it's even mentioned in one of the lists of the toll houses of not having a regular confessor, but going to different priests. Different times will give you conflicting advice.
Isn't that confusing?
That's a sin.
Well, because you can you can start using that, applying that.
So you tell one priest about your continual obsessive sin, and the other priest you don't tell him about it because you want him to have a good thought and idea of you.
Or you hide from having to say it again, and you go to a different priest, so you're avoiding them.
So it looks like you sin less often.
Yeah, and and so the thing is, we should have one spiritual father that we go to as all the time, and not go to different priests.
But that's not always
You can
possible.
go to
It's not always possible, but for example, if you have one spiritual father and you have and there's a confessor, father confessor that you go to, you keep your spiritual father advised of the low points, essentially, the big but the father confessor, you go to on a more on a less frequent, maybe on a frequent basis, but it should be the same person.
Right, but sometimes that's not even
No, the
possible.
spiritual father is a guiding.
Right.
Guiding.
Right.
Right. Mostly it's just for confession or whatever. I mean, you need some guidance. How do I do it?
Mhm.
So if you can't get to the confessor,
You can confess to anybody.
You can't.
you go to
can,
the
but-
next person. If you can't, if there's circumstances and you can't, then you go to the next best one, in your heart that you trust or you feel
Yeah.
comfortable with. But then you always come back to that same confessor.
Yeah, it's and
It doesn't work.
it's best to. It's always best to go to the
Or
same
do you
person.
wait
You
and
have
just
to,
not
you,
take communion?
You have to judge as to what the severity of what's happened.
Okay.
Can you go to a Catholic priest to confess
No.
in case there is no church,
No.
no Orthodox church in that area?
That used to be the policy of the Russian Church
Yes.
up until about 10 years ago. Yeah.
Well,
And then, 10 years ago, what?
An Orthodox could go to a Catholic priest if there was no Orthodox priest,
But if somebody is dying,
and that would, if somebody's dying, that can happen.
then
Hey,
Catholic
Bishop-
priest can relieve him of his sins, right?
Archbishop Nicodeme died in the arms of the Pope.
That's right. John Paul I.
Yeah.
And then
Just
there was
before he was
the
murdered.
story of the
Yes.
saint who I don't know, was he robbed or something, and then he found him. I don't know. Somehow he came together, and the guy confessed something to him. And he said, "Wait, let me go get." And he didn't come back. The guy was dead. So, and he wasn't a priest. He was a monk.
Yeah.
yeah.
But it was accepted as a confession.
Right. Well,
Yeah, on your deathbed, you don't know the time of your death. So,
right. But a lot of people do,
well, yeah, when
and
you're sick.
so the best thing is to call an Orthodox priest and confess to that priest, and that's
Can you record your confession before dying? On
recorded.
telephone, yeah. So that, after you're dead, the telephone is submitted to the priest.
Oh
And he relieves you of the sins.
No, you have to be alive for that to
I
happen.
think that happens at the funeral anyway.
no! Right.
Can you go to communion and not go to confession? I mean, if you don't feel, if you
Yeah,
feel
good question.
clean.
Yeah. Yes, you can.
The reason is I'm asking, it's a monk told me about that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, how do you feel? And I said, well, I don't feel like I have to go to confession. He said, you can go to communion.
Mm-hmm. That's the general monastic rule, at least for in my experience, is that if you have the blessing of your spiritual father, then you go to communion.
Blessing.
In other words, if you're going to visit a monastery someplace, so you go to the Holy Mountain, and you're going to a Greek monastery, you don't speak Greek, and they don't speak the languages that you speak, you don't have to go to confession. If your spiritual father blessed you to go to communion, then you go to communion.
But the problem
How do you explain that to them?
They would understand that.
Yeah.
They would say, you would just say, my spiritual father blessed me.
What Father Leonid here says before giving the communion, not him, but of course the priest,
Mm-hmm.
that anybody who had confessed their sins
Mm-hmm.
is eligible to come to receive the communion.
But when?
So when I come, I should tell the priest that, I feel it's okay.
Well,
No?
obviously we don't hear everybody's confession every week.
You can't. It's just.
That's a very good point.
We
That's
don't.
a very good point.
We hear a lot of confessions in this parish.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's,
And it's good. But there's
so
also
next time I can go for communion without confession. It's good.
it's every And as long as we're going on a regular basis,
Every few weeks.
every 2 or 3 weeks, if unless there's something particular on your conscience, you should be able to go to communion.
And if you can't think of any sense, ask your wife, she can help you.
That's right.
Well, she's the priest daughter, so she would know.
Yeah, we're going to end up pretty soon. Yeah. So, okay. Well, time is up.
Well, this is a very nice, different opportunities that have been opened. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. What do you call?
So I don't feel guilty now, Joseph.
Okay. Yeah. No. Guilt. Well, guilt is a sin. You have to confess.
You have to be careful what you say.
It's a good thing you said that in the open with the Metropolitan, because now he can absolve you.
Yeah.
Which is all I have to do.
Take care. But one of the things that it's important not to become obsessed with having to go to confession before each communion, and that's really important. You don't have to go to confession before each communion. We need to examine our conscience before each communion, and if our conscience excuses us, then we don't need to go to confession. But if our conscience accuses us of something, then we should go to confession.
And sometimes, you know, as you get older, you forget things.
Mm-hmm.
And you just didn't remember it, but you thought it was okay.
So, sometimes
you're
you
a sinner to receive communion.
Well, if you've forgotten it, you've forgotten it.
Even young people do that.
Uh-huh. And some people do it intentionally.
Well, there's a lot of times I think where your conscience can still remember it, though that it has been technically forgiven. You can still have an attachment to it, and you have to be really wise and discerning what's really just what are you still clinging on to versus where am I really at in the whole ballpark, you know?
You keep confessing it, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, you keep confessing it. I mean, there's
It's like taking out the layer of an onion. If you keep confessing it, it'll come out, and eventually you'll see.
Right.
No, hold on, that's completely wrong if I understand what you're speaking correctly. Is that I remember how it was described to me is that if you confess a sin and you get how do you call this stuff, like absolution, in that case the sin is gone.
It's gone.
It's wrong to confess it again
But
because
you fall, not if you fall into it, it's not wrong.
But the thing what I was trying to say is that yes, it's gone.
But you fall
But
into
you
it.
can still remember it. Just because it's gone doesn't mean you forget it.
Correct.
But you know that you.
But you should go and use your judgment to see, am I just really forgetting this, or is it? I'm sorry, is it really truly gone within me, or am I still having an attachment to it? That's a very difficult question.
It is.
It's not. It takes. There might be some.
In other words, if you commit a sin and you really and you confess it, but you remember it, and then you take pleasure in that remembrance, for example.
Right.
Then you confess that you have to confess.
Right.
It's not confessing the initial sin.
Right.
It's confessing the
brooding over it.
The brooding over it.
If
you fall into a sin, is that correct, Vladika? You confess it, and I'm sorry for the way I was thinking, as opposed to the way he was thinking was different. But you keep confessing a same sin, and eventually it'll uncover what's underlying, so that you can confess it again. Correct? Like, because you keep falling into it.
Yeah, if it's something you keep falling into.
Right.
If it's something repeated. That's
Well, in that case, it's a
You
new
keep
sin.
falling.
yeah, if it's a new sin,
Yes.
it's a new sin, but it's the same sin.
But if you
But there's a reason why you keep falling into a sin, because you're attached to it.
There could be
Maybe
something
there's
very
something
deeper underlying.
That's
yeah,
what,
that
that's
could be
what I was
entirely
saying.
different too.
That's exactly what I was
Because
saying.
for example, like I don't know, pride can manipulate itself into 10,000 different ways.
Exactly.
At the same day, at the end of the day, it's pride. You know.
But every day you fall into it, you
Right.
don't see it.
Yeah. Sorry, that was pretty deep.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything?
In Vesper service,
Mhm.
we hear at the end of toward the end of the service, a prayer for protection from vain thoughts and evil memories.
Mm-hmm.
That could fall under.
Yeah.
At a prayer to the Theotokos, we ask for all removed from all the recollected memories or something. What is the prayer? There's a prayer when we pray to the Theotokos to take those memories away.
Oh, in the evening row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which helps.
So was this helpful?
Oh, very.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Vladika.
So I was thinking for the next series to do the Book of Hebrews.
Well,
Interesting.
Sound interesting?
Yes.
The book the Roman bishop didn't want.
I don't know, but we got it.
Wasn't it Hebrews Revelation that they fought over when they were making the canon?
Yeah, because of the Hebrews is anonymous.
Right.
Vladika, what books have you covered? You've covered John, obviously. But, you know, I'm kind of late in the game of joining this, you know.
Well, then you can get it all on.
All online, okay.
All
Look
online.
it up.
Romans, Corinthians. What else?
For a small nominal fee, I'll forward them to you.
Oh.
Hey, it's my stuff.
It's his stuff. Yeah, what are you doing?
Does that mean I get royalties?
Of course. We'll set up your commission.
Oh, you're selling Vladika stuff. Yeah. Whoa.
All right, so let's pray. Shine, shine on Jerusalem, the glory of the Lord has shone on thee. Exalt now and be glad, O Zion. Be radiant, O most pure Theotokos, in the resurrection of thy Son. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and ever into ages of ages.
Amen.
God bless you. Christ is risen.
Truly is risen.